was Hail Smiling Morn, the signature tune of Bolsterstone Male Voice Choir, as many of you already know. My name is Frank Milnes, and for the last few years I've been putting together an archive of some of the choir's history. And whilst it is quite a weighty tome and there's a lot of information there, I thought maybe I could do a shortened version and do a little bit of a video so that people could see exactly what the choir had done over the last, well, since 1934. So here goes, and here's a little bit about the history of the choir and its achievements during those years. We started the choir in 1934, and it was William Evans, whose picture you can see there, started the choir, consisting mainly of young men out of the church choir, because William, of course, was the church choir master for many, many years. And there was a steady stream of young men coming through from the church choir, and so in 1934 William got together with a few of his mates, I think there were 8 of them altogether, and decided to form a male voice choir. And so I was actually one of the last choir boys when my voice broke to join the choir. But one of the earliest photographs we've got is in the 1940s, and in 1947 they decided to go to the Home Firth Music Festival, and of course that was when the tragedy happened, when they were on the way to the festival, that the coach they were riding on careered out of control down the hill and crashed at the bottom of the hill. You'll see from these photographs the devastation which was caused when it crashed into a building, and it's an absolute miracle that more people weren't killed, but actually 9 people did lose their lives, and it was a tragedy not only for the choir but for the whole district. This is the programme which, from the music festival they were going to attend on the day, the Home Firth musical competition. You can see that the test piece was Love Could I Only Tell Thee, and the choir's own choice that day was going to be Fain Would I Change That Note. This dreadful crash could actually have destroyed the choir. It could have been the end of what had begun a few years earlier. But the choir showed incredible strength, and they actually competed in the Home Firth Festival just 12 months later, and they gained a very creditable 2nd place. The choir then returned, after many years, it returned in 1987 to Home Firth to do a 40th anniversary concert in aid of the Home Firth Hospital where the injured had been treated. And of course the choir entered the concert that evening singing Love Could I Only Tell Thee, which was to have been the test piece in 1947. And this concert and the story of the crash created some interest among the local media, and Look North actually came and did a piece about the choir, broadcast on the BBC, and they interviewed some of the survivors from that crash.
October the 17th, 1947. The Bolsterstone Male Voice Choir were on their way from their home village in the hills above Sheffield to sing in the festival competition at Home Firth Civic Hall. Descending the steep Dunford Hill, the brakes of their coach suddenly failed. The driver, Tommy Yates, was struggling at the wheel. As the speed built up to over 60 miles an hour, some of the singers leapt to safety. A crash was inevitable. 9 of the choir died. 20 were seriously injured.
Just lift up your eyes, let your heart away. Be ready.
40 years on, some of the survivors have returned to the scene of the disaster. On Saturday, the anniversary of the crash, the choir is to sing in Home Firth Parish Church in a concert to raise money for Huddersfield Hospital, where many of the injured were treated. It's a gesture of thanks, but now as the survivors return to the place where so many of their friends died, the memories are poignant. One man still blames himself for the death of his brother-in-law.
He was a very nice tenor singer, and of course he didn't sing in our choir, he was singing with a local choir, and I persuaded him to come along with us on this particular day. In fact, he had several rehearsals, and he really made lots of difference to our choir, and I thought, well, I always tried to persuade him to join us, but he wouldn't. So anyhow, it was unfortunate that he lost his life partially through me.
To bring back some rather poor memories, really.
But you'd be glad the choir's still going on.
Oh, I'm very glad the choir's still going on, yeah. I wouldn't have liked it any other way. Singing's been my life, more or less, apart from work, you know.
We got to the top of the hill, we realised that it was a certain, it got over the top of the hill and it went down pretty steep. So the driver decided to change it to a lower gear. When he got into the lower gear, there was this huge crack and there were bits of pipe on the road, what they call a prop shaft. And of course we lost all braking power then.
Was there any sign of panic on board?
Not really. I mean, I was only 23 at the time, and I thought, right, we're motoring a bit now. No fears at all in them days at 23.
On Saturday, when the choir sing their hearts out for charity, they'll know that they're helping the hospital that helped them. More than that, they'll remember the past with pride, knowing the choir had the strength to overcome disaster.
That's my prayer at the end of the day. The end of the day.
The local media were very interested in this concert, and so obviously the Sheffield Star, did a piece about it. And Radio Sheffield interviewed Ashby Halliwell, who we saw in the film there, interviewed him for Radio Sheffield, and I think that this interview with Ashby just illustrates the strength of character, the stoicism with which these men carried on in spite of the tragedy. And I would just like to share this interview with you.
And that song, Love Could I Only Tell Thee, was to have been the choir's test piece on the night of the crash. They'll be singing it again at their special concert in the church at Holmfirth tomorrow evening. Ashby Halliwell, at 82, is the oldest member of the choir. He remembers the accident in which his wife, Aileen, lost her life.
We started from here in Bolsterstone, you know. And as soon as we saw the bus, it looked like a bit of a bone checker. Anyway, after a few comments, we got in the bus and set off. And when we got going up on the main Manchester Road, we mounted the footpath for a start and went about half a mile on the footpath. And then we carried on, fairly fast speed, certainly well over the speed limit today, and when we turned up to the left there, and most of them did a big sway and nearly left the seat, you know. Anyway, they shouted at him, this driver, but he went up and then we had a right hand turn to go down Underbank to about the Holmfirth, you see. So we started increasing in speed as soon as we got to the top, and faster and faster we went, so we began to shout at the driver, right, you know, get into the side, man, get into the side. He went straight on, faster and faster, and he said, right round over it. Shortly after that, the prop shaft rolled off down the road, nearly bet us. So, just we still kept increasing in speed and it got steeper and steeper. And when you come to the bottom of that hill, this building was stuck out. You got to do a quick left hand and then right hand turn. And you just couldn't take it, impossible at the speed we were travelling. And this great big bang, I was still sat in my seat and I could hear all this stonework tumbling down. I wondered when it was going to cease. And then it came all dark. I think it was a bucket was falling down actually. But when it had cleared away, it was a shambles inside. The people laid on the floor, you know. I got up and started looking around. My mate sat beside me there. He was unconscious. There was another sat behind me unconscious. And some of the seats had moved forward. I went looking among there, looking for the wife actually. She'd been sat just in front of me, but she was 2 or 3 seats away on the middle of the bus. So I tried to lift her up, see, well, I did manage to get her to the side of the bus, and then I put her down there. The bus side was ripped off. It was in open air, you see, and I put her down there, and then I went round looking for more, and I started waking Russell up. He gone to sleep in the fair, I think.
I can't listen to that interview with Ashby without feeling quite emotional, and I think it's such a huge tribute to people like Ashby that the choir continued to go on from strength to strength. But the accident that happened was a reminder, and it's something which the choir still thinks about very, very regularly. And 50 years later, after the crash, we went back to Home Firth to do another memorial concert, and again on the 70th anniversary. On the 50th anniversary, the choir decided that in memory of all those who had lost their lives in the crash, they would donate a stained glass window to St Mary's Church, Bolsterstone, where the choir had started. And a dedication service was held 50 years exactly to the day after the crash. And all the survivors of the crash and the relatives of those who lost their lives attended that service. The accident was still very much in people's minds because, of course, Tom Cook, one of the survivors of the crash, was still singing in the choir. The window is also a permanent reminder of the very close association that the choir has always had with St Mary's Church and the village of Bolsterstone. But sometimes out of tragedy can come happiness. And that was certainly the case for one of the survivors. Eric Firth spent some time in the Home Firth Hospital recovering from the accident, and one of the nurses who was looking after the injured was an Estonian refugee called Anne, who came here after the war. They became very good friends while Anne was nursing Eric, and they continued to see each other after Eric left the hospital, and then on Anne's 24th birthday they got married. And their son Robert is now currently the secretary of the choir. This photograph, taken some years later in the 1960s, shows some of the trophies that the choir had won at Morecambe and Buxton festivals. And one thing which this photograph does show is just how much of a family choir this was. One of the people killed in the crash was Alfred Pearson, and he left a wife and 9 children. 7 sons and 2 daughters. The youngest son, also called Alfred, was just a few days old. And amazingly, all 7 sons and 2 cousins as well all went on to sing in the choir. There were 3 Hodgkinson brothers, there were 3 Dyson brothers and 2 Cook brothers. Tom Cook, of course, being secretary of the choir for many years, and his son now carries on the family association with the choir, singing in the top tenors. My father sang in the choir, and I joined when I was 16. It just gives you an indication of the strong family ties within the choir, which helped to bind the choir together. It was a very sad day in 1965 when Bill Evans died, but he left a great legacy. He had been church choir master for many years, up to his death, and his family donated a stained glass window in his memory. The window is there in the chancel on the north wall. But the choir has to continue, and so the search for a new conductor started. Eventually Alvin Tipple was appointed conductor in the summer of 1965. Alvin inherited a young, enthusiastic choir, and he took the choir up to a new level. At this time we were entering what I would describe as a golden age for male voice choirs. Male voice choirs had traditionally grown up around the factories and the heavy industries, the tin mines in Cornwall, the coal mines in South Wales and South Yorkshire, the steelworks in Wales, Yorkshire and the North East. Every village had its own male voice choir. Alvin was very keen to work with and improve this young choir which he'd taken over. And so after 4 years in charge Keen to take the choir to a new level, he entered them into the internationalised Stepford in Llangollen, which was undoubtedly recognised as the finest music festival in the UK. In those days, competition was restricted not only to a certain number of the choir, but to choirs of a certain standard. Any choirs who were unknown to the organisers were asked to sing in Llangollen at the town hall on the morning of the competition, and the organisers decided whether or not they were good enough to compete in the afternoon. Just imagine rehearsing for several months, travelling to Llangollen and being told on the morning of the competition that you weren't good enough to compete in the competition. But that is actually what happened to some choirs. Fortunately, our reputation must have preceded us, as we never had to suffer the ignominy of singing in the morning prior to the main event. Our first trip to Llangollen was in 1969 and we achieved a creditable 11th place. But our subsequent visits in 1970, 71 and 72 proved to be something of a fairy tale, as we were placed 4th in 1970, 2nd in 1971, and then in 1972 we actually won the internationalised Stepford in Llangollen. These were pictures taken as we were lining up to go on stage for our prize-winning performance, and then after we'd sung. This picture was taken on the day as we posed for the official photograph, and there are actually 4 people on this photograph who are still singing in the choir today. There's Eric, that's Graham Pearson, who hasn't really changed a lot, I have to say, and I'm sure Graham will give me a fiver for saying that. Then there's Lionel Shaw. Lionel was smiling then, he's still smiling today. Alfred Pearson. Alfred was only a few days old when the Holmfirth crash happened, so he never knew his father. But he's singing in the choir then, he was still singing in the choir today. And then there's yours truly, sporting a good head of black hair in those days. It was a huge success for the choir, and the start of a remarkable period of over 30 years when the choir enjoyed many successes, both in concerts and at music festivals, both at home and abroad. We held our annual concert in the City Hall in Sheffield to almost capacity audiences. We had some of the top-class opera singers such as Moira Anderson, Kenneth McKellar, Peter Glossop, and we sang with the very best of the military bands. The Welsh Guards, the Coldstream Guards, the Irish Guards, the Central Band of the RAF, and of course the Band of the Royal Marines, which were always a huge draw, and we sang with them in 9 times during that period. When Alvin Tipple left the choir, we found an excellent replacement in Terry Hobson, who was the musical director of South Yorkshire Opera. Terry brought a new style of leadership to the choir. Alvin had been very successful with the choir, but he was never really noted for his sense of humour. He didn't smile a lot. Whereas Terry was a very cheerful chap who smiled a lot, and he brought new music to the choir from light opera, such as Cat-Like Tread from Pirates of Penzance, Sunrise Sunset from Fiddler on the Roof, as well as arrangements of modern pop songs. But he also loved the big male voice sound. Some of the modern arrangements, he didn't always get the universal approval of all the members. But then it's reassuring to know that maybe some things never change. One of the songs was Mull of Kintyre. So as well as the concerts at the City Hall and other places, we also continue to compete at the highest level, winning music festivals at Cheltenham, Freckleton and Blackpool, and on one very memorable occasion in 1978 when we sang in the Cardigan High Stedford. Anyone who's ever been to Cardigan will know that it takes a very long time to get there. We had our fair share of troubles getting there when the coach broke down, and we arrived just with 30 minutes to spare before our class began. There were 6 choirs competing, 3 from Wales and 3 from Yorkshire. There was ourselves, Honley and Thurnscoe, and to cut a long story short, we were successful, we won the competition, Thurnscoe were second and Honley were third, and the 3 Welsh choirs were 4th, 5th and 6th. Yes, we did enjoy that competition, but we were a little bit concerned when it was getting rather late when we left the ground, and we thought that the hotel where we were staying might have closed the bar and we might not be able to continue our celebrations. But it wasn't a problem. One of our members, Jeff Hardesty, he said, "Don't worry lads, I've rung the hotel and they will have staff on hand and you'll be able to drink all night if you want to go on celebrating, so don't worry about it." So we left the competition field in good spirits, travelled to the hotel, but when we reached the hotel, I'm afraid our spirits were dampened. The hotel was in absolute darkness, and so we trudged off the coach and up towards the hotel, feeling that we were not going to be able to continue our celebrations. But as we opened the door, the lights went on, the champagne corks popped, and yes, we did continue the celebrations until the not very small hours of the morning. So it was a terrific success and a big boost to the choir. The following year, 1979, we were approached by BBC Television. They were making a documentary series called The Diary of Britain, and they wanted to come to Bolsterstone and they wanted to film 5 of our members at work in rehearsal preparing for the concert. And so that's what happened, and it was quite an occasion in the village when the local village choir appeared on national television in a 40-minute documentary entitled The Diary of Britain. The full programme can be seen on my complete archive, but for the purposes of this shorter version, it's not included. When Terry Hobson left to concentrate on other musical activities, we had another brief spell with Alvin Tipple, and during this time the choir embarked on their first overseas venture when they sang in Limburg, West Germany. Since then, we've visited Germany on several occasions, Italy, Greece, Rhodes, USA, Canada, Hungary, South Africa and Denmark, so we've travelled quite a bit through the time. And when Alvin retired, the choir then advertised for a new musical director. This was quite an exciting time for male voice choirs, and we had been very prominent in music festivals throughout the country, and so the advert drew some very interesting and very capable applicants, including Geoffrey Wyn Davis and Christopher Wiltshire. In the event, the choir chose Geoffrey Wyn Davis, and the next 12 years were a very exciting and memorable time for the choir. It was interesting to hear Geoffrey's take on how he first heard about the choir, taken from a radio Sheffield, which he did a few years
Geoffrey Wyn Davis. He told me about the first time he heard the choir.
It was in the Royal Albert Hall at the Sainsbury's Choir of the Year competition, which hadn't come under BBC's auspices. It has since. And I remember I was there with my Manchester choir, and during a break from their participation, I sat up in the gallery. It seems a million miles away in the Albert Hall, and I saw this male voice choir, and I said, "Oh, which choir is this?" And I read the programme notes, and the first thing that struck me about the choir was the Holmfirth disaster, which figured quite prominently in the programme notes. And I listened to the choir. They didn't win on that occasion, but I thought, yes, they could be really good. I'd really like to get my hands on them. Little did I know, of course, that about a year later they would advertise for a new conductor.
Where did you see the advertisement for a new conductor?
Well, they had the foresight to advertise it in Classical Music magazine, which I can't think that many male voice choirs would have done. But they did, and that's a journal I read, like, as well most musicians do, and it was as simple as that, really.
Did you have to have an audition for them?
Oh, very much so. Absolutely. 2 auditions, in fact. I've never been grilled so much in my life. Yes, I had to have a talk through with a committee up here, in fact, where we are sitting now, and then to go through a full-scale evening.
Geoffrey brought a completely new concept to male voice choir singing. He felt that male voice choirs were stuck in a time warp, singing over sentimentalised Victorian ballads and Welsh hymns with 100 bloody amens. He introduced a more classical programme and included madrigals, lots of music by foreign composers, all was sung in the original language, and more recent works written by modern contemporary composers, some of which were very difficult pieces to sing, but very enjoyable once we'd learnt them. During this period we sang in Latin, French, German, Italian, Czech, and occasionally in English. He'd only been with us 12 months when we decided to take part in the Welsh Choir of the Year competition again for the second time. We'd entered it 2 years earlier as we were affiliated to the Welsh Association of Male Choirs, and on that occasion we got to the final, which was held in the magnificent St David's Hall. We had to qualify for the final from the North Wales area by singing against other North Wales choirs at Connors Quay. And then the final in St David's Hall was held with other choirs from different regions of Wales, and there were 6 choirs in total in the final. And on this particular year, the Welsh television decided to feature the winning choir in a Christmas special and then to follow the choir throughout the year, a year in the life of. The head adjudicator on this time was the great Sir Geraint Evans, and to cut a long story short, yes, we won the competition against stiff competition from some other Welsh choirs. And on that occasion we sang one of our favourite pieces, My Bonny Lass.
My bonny lass she smileth when she heart beguileth.
Yes, we were presented with this beautiful glass trophy and we were invited back onto stage to sing again in St David's Hall, and the hall emptied as quick as the snow off a dyke. Needless to say, Welsh television immediately cancelled their contract to feature the winning choir in what would undoubtedly have been their worst Christmas special ever. And of course, things only got worse when the next day, back in the Castle Inn in Bolsterstone, whilst celebrating our success and posing for photographs, the beautiful trophy slipped onto the floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces. Fortunately, we were able to find a suitable replacement for the trophy, but of course the remnants of the original will continue to command pride of place in our trophy cabinet. The following year we entered the competition again with a piece commissioned especially for the choir written by Andrew Carter from York, and we included for the first time choreography.
7 p.m. at Stocksbridge High School, and the choir's 90 members arrive for some fine-tuning before tomorrow's Welsh Choir of the Year title, which they won last year. For this year's attempt, there's a new work specially written for them by a top Yorkshire composer.
Now William had his critics, he certainly had his faults.
It's called William the Conqueror. He's done the lyrics as well. And it's basically a tongue-in-cheek account, a very accurate tongue-in-cheek account. It's historically absolutely accurate, with references to Greensleeves and the Can-Can and even Handel's famous Zadok the Priest anthem. But although it's a very witty tongue-in-cheek lyric and musical setting, it's very good music, and that is one thing we keep very much in mind.
But their secret's not merely a Welsh conductor. They've added something quite new to male voice choirs: choreography.
Up in Yorkshire, playing a one-day test at Stamford Bridge with Tostig, Hardrada and the rest. He quelled them in one innings and had just declared for tea when the news arrived from Sussex of
Never before in the choir's 50 years of competitive singing have they considered dancing to victory. Not that that daunted choreographer Cathy Molson, charged with getting them to do it this time.
Can you make the handshake much stronger? Have Willie to thank and make the knee bends more lyrical. You know, have a smile and everything.
The choir admit that it hasn't been the easiest of tasks for Cathy to teach music and movement to butchers and bakers, to policemen and accountants, doctors and steel workers.
People didn't take to it possibly too kindly at the beginning, but now they've accepted it. Now they've got into it and they've got to know it. They've accepted it well. Like anything, you know, people don't like change, do they? You know, different to what we've done in the past.
Do you think this new movement and dance sequence can win you this year's coveted prize?
I would like to think so. It will certainly be different. I don't think they'll have seen anything like it in St David's Hall at Cardiff before. But we shall have to wait and see whether it'll win it is.
Now William had his critics, he certainly had his faults, but he gave us Norman arches, Norman pillars, Norman vaults. And those who call it Francie and who like a little swang, with chateaux and champagne and things have William to thank. The connoisseurs of cordon bleu and Catholic clientele can bless them, reconquer and eat their names as well. But we are Anglo-Saxon, we're determined not to mix. We love to hate the bastard and 1066.
Well, we didn't win this time, and we've never done choreography again, but it was an experience. You heard Kathy ask the question, can you make the knee bend a little more lyrical? I'm not sure that any of us knew how to make a knee bend a little more lyrical, but put an attractive young lady in front of 60 old men and they'll do whatever she asks them to. The Welsh have always prided themselves on their singing and their male voice choirs, and their media are always keen to promote it. For a couple of years, Radio Wales ran their own Choir of the Year competition, which we entered, and again this entailed a huge learning curve. As you proceeded to the next round, you had to prepare and sing a completely different programme in a matter of weeks. Geoffrey's approach to learning new music was always, I don't go at the speed of the slowest learner, but at the speed of the quickest learner. Radio Wales sent a team of sound engineers on a specific day, and we had to sing our chosen programme, which was recorded, and then when it was broadcast, the adjudicator listened to the pieces and gave his adjudication on air without knowing the identities of the choir. While we were busy rehearsing, our publicity manager at the time, Jerry Seymour, was busy organising a spectacular stunt for us to raise money for the BBC Children in Need appeal. He came up with the idea of a sing around Britain, and he managed to persuade Britannia Airways to provide a plane to fly us around 8 British airports in a day, singing at every place and raising money for children in need. We finished in London, appearing live on the Children in Need programme. We repeated the event 2 years later, and together with events organised throughout the region, we raised over £50,000 for the Children in Need appeal. Obviously we had a very enjoyable day, and supplies along the route had to be loaded onto the plane. Back in the competitive business of singing, we entered the Northern Male Voice Choir Championships for the first time in 1988. The test piece was A Crown of Praise, was written by Grayston Ives of the Kingsingers. We had a baritone solo in it, and it proved to be quite a memorable event for us. We recruited a young baritone singer, Fran Wells, to sing with us and to sing the solo. Yes, the beautiful voice of Fran Wells, which helped us to win the competition. Little did Fran realise when he sang that solo just what the future held in store for him. Fran continued to sing with us, became Deputy Musical Director shortly afterwards, and then Musical Director for 19 years. And following his retirement 2 years ago, he still helps out when necessary as our Musical Director. So in all, he has now been with us for over 32 years. And he still hasn't learnt the Yorkshire accent. As he said on many occasions, he's merely a missionary from the south. I mentioned earlier about our annual concerts at the City Hall, and this period of time from the late 60s to the mid-90s were really golden years for male voice choir singing. Several of the choirs organised and hosted major competitions solely for male voice choirs, attracting up to 20 competitors with top-class adjudicators, and we competed very successfully in all of these competitions. We were very confident at this time in our singing and in the type of music we were performing, and I don't think it's too boastful to say that during this period we entered every competition with very high expectations. One of our many overseas tours was to Denmark in 1991. We had recently commissioned a new piece of music by Chris Wiltshire, and the text he used for this composition was from Shakespeare's Hamlet, when Hamlet sees the ghost of his murdered father on the castle walls. And when we were there, we performed a concert in the church at Elsinore in the shadow of the castle walls. So we had the wonderful experience of singing Chris Wiltshire's piece, What May This Mean?, at the very place where the ghost of Hamlet's father had appeared. Our president during this time was Howard Woodcock of Woodcock Travel. Howard and his wife Rita were great supporters of the choir and travelled all over the country with us. Howard was a veteran of the Burma campaign in World War II and invited us to perform at various Burma Star reunions. This one was at the Royal Albert Hall with Vera Lynn. One of the main guests on this occasion was Field Marshal Slim, who had been revered in the military for his work in Burma during the Second World War, repelling the Japanese invasion at Impal and Kohima. During the interval in the concert, Terry and Tommy were enjoying drinks with the artists and guests, including General Slim, when one of our choir, Roy Bagnall, came into the room. Terry and Tom looked round and wondered why Tom had wandered into the VIP area. But before they could say anything, General Slim marched over to Roy, hand outstretched, saying, "Bagnall, how are you, old chap?" and proceeded to greet him as an old friend. Nobody in the choir knew that Roy had previously been in the SAS and had served as General Slim's Batman. So you never know who you may be sitting next to on a Monday night. We also sang at the Strensall Barracks, York, on a couple of the Burma Star reunion events, and of course Ray Peake's Road to Mandalay was always top of the bill. The Northern Male Voice Choir Championships, which we had won in 1988, had become very popular, and Yorkshire Television decided to cover the event in 1989. They filmed several choirs rehearsing for the competition, highlighting Bolsterstone as they were the previous winners, and then filmed the competition on the day. Unfortunately, on this occasion, we had to settle for fourth place. In 1990, the competition was rebranded as the National Male Voice Choir Champions, which were obviously a very prestigious title to win. At the first national championships, we achieved a very creditable second place out of 12 competing choirs from all over the UK. And then the second time we entered the competition was in 1992. The commissioned test piece on this occasion was a piece called Bermudas, written by a local composer, Barry Russell. Our conductor, Geoffrey Wynne Davis, described it as being fiendishly difficult. Barry Russell was there to hear the premiere of this composition several times, and he was obviously very impressed with our performance, and we won several National Male Voice Choir Championships. In 1993, we embarked on a very ambitious project when we entered the South African Eisteddfod. It came about through Keith Fleming, who was originally from Halifax. He emigrated to Roodepoort, South Africa, and his love of singing led him to become the instigator of the South African Eisteddfod, which he based unashamedly on the Llangollen Eisteddfod. With help from the South African Eisteddfod and a lot of fundraising, we had a wonderful 10 days in Roodepoort. A very interesting time politically, coming as it did just 12 months before the first multiracial presidential elections, which saw Nelson Mandela elected as president. Our visit created an enormous amount of interest in South Africa. So after an overnight flight, we landed at 5 a.m, having had no sleep and possibly a little too much to drink during the flight, and we were met by a national television crew who wanted us to sing. We did sing, and perhaps fortunately we never heard the recording, although we learnt later that it had been broadcast on their national TV network. We were placed second in the Male Voice Choir section, and we certainly had a trip to remember. 2 years later, the choir which beat us in South Africa were doing a European tour, and we hosted them in Bolsterstone for a few days. A wonderful example of the people you meet and the friendships you meet through singing. When Geoffrey decided to retire in 1995, it was always going to be a difficult job to replace him. Fran Wells, our deputy conductor, couldn't commit to the job due to family commitments, and so Catherine Williams took over the baton from Geoffrey. Unfortunately, after an initial 6-month period, Catherine felt she couldn't carry on and decided to resign from the position. Fran continued to hold the fort while we found a new musical director, and another very poignant moment for Fran was conducting at a concert we did for the Meningitis Trust. We did 2 concerts, one in Lincoln Cathedral and one in Gloucester Cathedral. In Gloucester we sang The Fire Kindled, which had recently been sung as the test piece for the national championships. The poem for the song had been written by Ivor Gurney, who was a Gloucestershire lad himself, who suffered tragically with mental illness following the war, and there is a plaque commemorating his life in the cathedral. So to sing his wonderful poem in the beautiful confines of Gloucester Cathedral was a very special moment. We continued our search for a new conductor, and then Chris Wiltshire, who had just returned from conducting Felling Male Voice Choir, accepted our invitation to conduct Bolsterstone Male Voice Choir. You will recall that Chris was one of the people shortlisted for the job when Geoffrey Wynne Davis was appointed, so we knew Chris and his capabilities both as a conductor and composer. Chris was appointed as musical director in September, but due to a previous commitment in New Zealand, he was unable to take up its position until January, so Fran continued to take us during this current period. The National Male Voice Choir Championships, which were last held in 1983, were resurrected by the Denbighshire County Council in 1997, and the competition was held in Rhyl. We were conducted on this occasion by Fran, and our 15-minute programme included 2 of Chris Wiltshire's compositions, What May This Mean and Birth of a Nation. 13 choirs entered the competition from all over the UK, and we were delighted to win the competition and once more to be crowned national champions. Our patron at this time was Sir Hugh Sykes, and he was involved with the Arthritis and Rheumatism Council, and he organised a charity event in the grounds of Chatsworth House. This was a huge event, an open-air concert in the grounds of Chatsworth, complete with fireworks and dancing waters. We were sharing the stage with our old friends, the City of Sheffield Brass Band, with whom we performed on several previous occasions. The event was a huge success, rounded off with Land of Hope and Glory, fireworks and dancing waters, with a magnificent Chatsworth House, providing a fitting backdrop. 1997 also saw us travel to Lake Garda for the International Music Festival, and whilst we weren't highly placed, we did have a very enjoyable stay, finding time to visit Verona and Venice. During this time, the choir management were looking at ways to promote the choir and attract new members. The mission statement was new music, new members, new audiences. An opportunity to apply for funding to further our aims came about from the National Lottery. An ambitious bid was put together to apply for funding. The choir was delighted to have their application accepted, and received a grant of £23,000. The choir were also featured on the BBC One National Lottery Live programme.
And how music and musicians are deriving benefit from your lottery cash concerns Britain's leading male voice choir. We sent the fresh-faced and fine-featured Simon London to South Yorkshire.
I'm in Bolsterstone, a village so small you can actually walk through it in a couple of minutes. But this tiny place has a massive reputation, thanks to the talents of 90 men and their music.
She smileth when she hearts beguileth. She smileth when she hearts beguileth.
There's always been a strong musical tradition in the community, but it was in 1934 that the church choir became the village choir, as depicted in this beautiful stained glass window behind me.
Now, Tom, you remember this change taking place, don't you?
I do very well, very vividly, actually. I'm 82 now, and I've been well, I've had a good 64 years.
Any chance for me, or am I too young?
I wouldn't think so. I think they accept anybody who can sing.
All right, that's me out then.
As well as providing entertainment, it has given locals a focus. Farmers, butchers and steelworkers all sing in the choir. And when it comes to success, they're in a league of their own. Their trophy cabinet has over 20 awards. Frank, you're not just a farmer, you're also chairman of Bolsterstone Choir, and you won the UK Male Voice Championship last year. So what do you need lottery money for?
The money will be spent on commissioning new music, specifically for Bolsterstone Male Voice Choir, and also for staging, lighting, public address systems, which will help us to perform in venues which weren't previously suitable. Hopefully we'll perform to a wider audience and that will attract new members.
The UK's largest and most successful choir touches every aspect of this community. The village hall, the church, and of course, the pub. Over the years, the lads have had many reasons to come in here and toast their successes, but now, thanks to this lottery grant, they've got yet another reason to raise their glasses. Cheers, lads.
Cheers.
I think I'm slurring.
After a successful 3 years with the choir, Chris Wiltshire decided to move on to concentrate on his other musical commitments. He certainly left us with a host of new music which we will continue to sing today. Our deputy Fran Wells, who had been with us for 11 years, took over the baton. We had entered the Bangor Music Festival, which was rapidly establishing itself as a prestigious musical festival, both with Geoffrey Wynne Davis and Chris Wiltshire having adjudicated at the festival in previous years. It was organised by Joan Houston, the musical director of Bangor Ladies, who was keen to grow the festival into an international event with choirs from the mainland as well as from Northern to South Island. We have competed in Bangor Festival on several occasions, but our first one is the one we will always remember. We had been invited to sing in the opening concert on the Friday evening. Having landed in Dublin around lunchtime, we boarded the coach to take us to Bangor. Unfortunately, the traffic was horrendous and the journey took longer than expected. In fact, the concert had started by the time we arrived, but we sang in the second half of the concert and received a tremendous reception from the audience. The following morning we were given a civic reception in the town hall, hosted by the Mayor of County Down, Marsden Fitzsimmons. Marsden had been at the concert the night before and was in fact an excellent singer. We had a very entertaining civic reception, including a wonderful rendition of the Bold Gendarmes with Marsden and our own Ray Peake. We competed in several sections during the 2 days and came away with several trophies. After celebrating until the not so early hours of the morning, we awoke to stormy weather, and the news that our Seacat crossing had been cancelled. Our departure was delayed by 12 hours, and Joan Houston declared later that she didn't know what time we were going to arrive on the Friday, but having arrived, she thought she was never going to get rid of us. Later that year, the National Male Voice Championships in Rill. Unfortunately, there were only 3 choirs competing, but our friends from down the road in Combe Valley were there, so we knew the competition was going to be fierce, and indeed it was. Fortunately, we again came out on top, and so we went into the next millennium as the leading male voice choir in the country. The following year, we were invited to sing in the Athens Music Festival organised by Thrasos Kavouras. I mentioned earlier about the context made through singing in competitions. You never know who is listening, and this has proved very relevant to the choir on several occasions. Geoffrey Wyn Davis, hearing us at the Albert Hall. Barry Russell, who composed Bermudas, hearing us at the National Championships. I'll say more about him later. Thrasos, who we didn't know at all, had adjudicated on several occasions at Llangollen, and so he had heard us sing on several occasions. So when he invited us to Athens Festival, he also invited us to take part in the opening concert, to join with the Plovdiv National Orchestra and Chorus in a performance of Beethoven's Ode to Joy, and to join with the Hellenic mixed choirs to sing Va Pensiero, Speedy Journey, and Bruckner's Ave Maria. That concert was one I will certainly never forget. Singing alongside those professional singers and musicians was an experience never to be forgotten. 2 years later, we travelled to Rhodes for the International Music Festival, organised again by our friend Thrasos Kavouras. The following month, we held the first of our open-air concerts in the grounds of the old vicarage, Bolsterstone. Our choir patron at this time was Pam Brooks, who lived at the old vicarage and had a very large garden. Sadly, her husband Stuart, who was a choir member, died in 2001 from cancer, and so to raise money for Western Park Hospital, who had cared for Stuart, Pam allowed us to use her beautiful garden for three al fresco concerts, always finishing with Land of Hope and Glory, complete with fireworks. These events were very popular and raised thousands of pounds for Western Park. Unfortunately, on this occasion, we had chosen the coldest June day in history, and the wind was blowing straight down the garden and into the temporary stage. When we came to the finale of Land of Hope and Glory, the fireworks went off right on cue, and immediately smothered the stage and the choir in smoke and sparks, some of which settled on the decorations and threatened to set the whole stage on fire. Fortunately, we survived, with just a few scorch marks on the decorations. On our second concert was even more popular, and the crowds flocked to the old vicarage, bringing their boxes of sandwiches, cakes, and not forgetting the wine and champagne. Our guest this evening, previous conductor Geoffrey Wyn Davis, who compared the concert, and his wife Fiona, who was the guest soloist. This time the weather was kinder, and again we had a very enjoyable evening. The third concert was held 2 years later, when Geoffrey and Fiona were again our guests, and this time their son Max, who sang with the Manchester Boys Choir, was also one of their soloists. 2002 was proven to be a very busy year, as the following month we travelled once more to Llangollen for the International Line Stepford. It was a long wait on a long afternoon before we went on stage. The set piece was The Soldier's Lot by Leos Janáček, which we sang in Czechoslovakian, and one of our own pieces was What May This Mean, written by our previous conductor, Chris Wiltshire. We sang very well, and we were delighted with our performance, and even more delighted when the results were announced and we had won the competition again exactly 30 years since our previous victory at Llangollen. So again we had something to celebrate. And whether or not to enter choral competitions is always a debatable issue, but one thing is absolutely certain. If you enter a prestigious competition and win, it does wonders for the morale of the choir. And probably more importantly, I always feel that stretching yourself as a choir to perform challenging music to a high standard is hugely rewarding, and it's also a great help when learning other, maybe less challenging pieces. The following year we embarked on a tour of Hungary, performing at various concerts, but the icing on the cake was the opportunity to sing in the magnificent St. Stephen's Basilica in Budapest. This was another example of how the choir has given us the wonderful opportunity to sing in some of the most beautiful cathedrals and concert halls, both at home and abroad. It's occasions like this you will never forget. A common situation amongst male voice choirs has always been recruiting new members, particularly younger members, and this has become more of a problem with the decline in the heavy industries, which in the past had been fertile recruiting grounds for male choirs. So in 2010 the choir looked seriously at how it could attract new members. They joined forces with the World Male Voice Choir to launch an ambitious project entitled Come and Sing. The idea was to invite men of all ages to come along and sing and join a Come and Sing choir. The choir would rehearse under the musical directors of Bolsterstone and Whirl and then perform as a standalone choir with Bolsterstone and Whirl choirs at a concert in Ponce Forge, Sheffield. Following the concert, the new choristers would then be invited to join either the Bolsterstone or Whirl choirs. Thousands of leaflets were distributed in the local area, and a choir of about 35 men rehearsed weekly and then performed as a choir. BBC presenter Krista Ackroyd was the compere for the evening. The three choirs combined at the end of the concert for a couple of joint items to provide a fabulous finale to a great concert, with over 100 voices on stage. Some of the singers from that initiative are now singing in the choir. I mentioned earlier that you never know who is listening when you perform at a concert or a competition. Way back in 1990, when we won the National Male Voice Choir Championships, the test piece Bermudas was written by Barry Russell. Some years later, the renowned jazz saxophonist John Sermon was commissioned by the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival to write a piece of music for a male voice choir. Having composed somewhat unconventional set of pieces for male voice choirs, he approached Barry Russell to ask if he could recommend any male voice choirs who would be prepared to tackle his composition, and Barry suggested he contact Bolsterstone Male Voice Choir. John did just that, and it was the start of a very ambitious project.
The commission came from the Huddersfield Contemporary Music Festival, who invited me to write a piece for male voice choir, because there are one or two male voice choirs up there near Huddersfield. And that was the real beginnings of it, and then we to and froed a bit. What will it be? Will it be with a brass band? Will it be this? Will it be that? And the other. And eventually decided that, in a sense, the choir would be it, and I just need some accompaniment, as simple as possible from my point of view, so that we really used the choir in every possible way. They were the focal point of the music, because for me, I wasn't really interested in writing a jazz piece that had a male voice choir accompaniment. I wanted to write a piece of music that actually was about the choir and that really featured the voices, and they were the central feature, and we just worked around it, and I just floated in and out and played with it and around it, you know. So that's what I've tried to do. And yeah, well, you're going to find out what the results are.
We had to learn 9 pieces all in total, not all in the English language, and not in a style which was familiar to male voice choirs. Pieces such as the Assarini hunting song, which was sung in, would you believe, the Assarini language, spoken by the Assarini tribe, one of the indigenous tribes of Brazil. I have to say there won't be many male voice choirs who've sung in Assarini, and I can assure you that the pronunciation was entirely authentic. Other pieces in the suite highlighted the industries in the north of England, such as the mining, steelworking and textile mills, and this is an extract from the piece that he wrote about the mining. We performed the world premiere of Lifelines in Huddersfield Town Hall on November the 15th, and then the following day in the Queen Elizabeth Hall on the South Bank in London, where we received a standing ovation from the 700-strong audience. The South Bank concert was also broadcast on BBC Radio 3 on the 30th of December. It had been a fantastic opportunity to work with world-class professional musicians, and I think we certainly learnt a lot and really enjoyed our time with John Sermon and Howard Moody. 2018 saw the retirement of two people who had been the keystones to many of the choir's successes over the years. Our musical director, Fran Wells, announced at the AGM that he was stepping down as musical director and handing over to his deputy, Daniel Timmins, who will obviously be able to continue Fran's work as he was taught by Fran when he was a pupil at King Edward's School. Fran's association with the choir goes back 30 years to 1988, when he joined us to sing the solo in A Crown of Praise. Fran's done a fantastic job for the choir and is the second longest serving musical director after the choir's founder, Bill Evans. Fran's continuing his association with the choir in the role of deputy musical director, so he will still be playing a big part in the continued success of the choir. At the same time, our long-serving accompanist Lorraine Pearson also announced her retirement, to be replaced by her friend and colleague Kim Kay. Lorraine came to the choir as accompanist in 1984, and what an amazing accompanist and pianist she is. I've lost count of the number of times she has been singled out for praise by adjudicators at competitions for her excellent accompanying. Lorraine is also continuing her ties with the choir, deputising for Kim when she is unavailable. 2018 also saw the revival of the Stocksbridge and District Music Festival, co-organised by Bolsterstone Male Voice Choir and In Your Face Arts. It's a non-competitive music festival designed to showcase the musical talents of local people, especially young people. Such was the success of the initial festival that it decided to expand it into a two-day event in 2019. A new broom sweeps clean, and so when we decided to visit Bangor again for the International Choral Festival, our new musical director Dan Timmins produced several new pieces of music to learn with alongside some old favourites. We were again invited to a civic reception in the town hall by the mayor, and another very enjoyable weekend ensued. 2020 will be remembered as the year of the coronavirus, when the whole country came to a standstill. It will eventually pass and life will return to normal, and when that does, we look forward to continuing the future of Bolsterstone Male Voice Choir. I mentioned earlier that Complete Archive contains much more information about the choir's history. It consists of over 600 slides, several hours of video footage including 2 full television programmes and around 150 songs, recordings of songs. If anybody would like a copy of the archive, please let me know. In the meantime, that's all for now. We're not practicing at the moment because of the coronavirus, which has given me the time to produce this video, but we will be back, and I wish you all the very best of luck in the future.
Smiling on, the tips and hills we go, the tips and hills we go, and whose rosy fingers open wide the gates of heaven, the gates of heaven, and whose rosy fingers open wide the gates of heaven. Hail, smiling on, the tips and hills we go, the tips and hills we go, and whose rosy fingers open wide the gates of heaven, the gates of heaven, and whose rosy fingers open wide the gates of heaven.